So let's talk about the first lecture here, which is first chapter in the book. So digital forensics is retrieving data from computers or digital devices for use as evidence in court or other kinds of evidence, like I say, to investigate an incident. So it's considered a science, and in particular, the type that we're talking about here, the old-fashioned stuff primarily aimed at court, you attempt to make evidence that is admissible in court. So we'll have a little bit about court procedures and stuff in this class, although not very much. All right. So there's incriminating evidence is inculpatory, and evidence that demonstrates that someone is innocent is called exculpatory. So it's not the same thing as computer security. Computer security is protecting systems from attacks, and computer forensics is analyzing a system to see what has been happening on there. So it does not protect you from anything. It just analyzes what's happened after some kind of bad thing has gone on. Or perhaps after nothing bad has gone on, you can investigate a system in order to prove that something didn't happen, as well as that something did happen. So, all right. And another issue, of course, is recovering deleted files. That's data recovery, which uses the same tools and techniques, and is closely related. But technically, what we're talking about here is the part of gathering evidence for criminal investigation. All right, but mostly it's about understanding how data is stored in a machine, so the same information is used for both. So email is very important. The great thing about email is it's very easy to recover. There's copies of it all over the place, on your machine, on the servers, on the other person's machine, and it has a date and a name of a person that sent it. So it proves that somebody did something and when they did it. So that's very handy. So email is often quite incriminating, and often it's the crime. If people are emailing illegal images around, like child pornography, then the email alone might be enough to prove the crime. The chain of events is another nice thing. Email, you have an email and then a reply. And as we've seen in the last year with all these cases surrounding Donald Trump, the SMS chat messages turned out to be super important. People are sending SMSs, plotting things about the insurrection and stuff and replying, and that's very incriminating in court, not only because it's tied to a person and it has a time, but also because it's easy for juries to understand. One big problem in this field is if you analyze a computer and you do something complicated, you might not be able to explain it to the judge and jury. There's a San Francisco district attorney named Conrad Rosario, and he took this course, and he came and gave guest lectures in this course several times for me, and he was very proud of the fact he was the guy that convicted the San Francisco network administrator. About 10 years ago, the head network what's that?
Who is this guy that you're talking about?
Conrad Rosario. Conrad Rosario, in about 10 years ago, San Francisco network administrator.
Is he a judge in the Superior Court system here in North South?
What's that?
He's a judge in the Superior Court system?
He is a district attorney in the court system in San Francisco. And what he did, there was a network administrator in San Francisco who was a very crazy, dangerous guy. He had been gone to jail 4 times for armed robbery in Texas, and then he moved to San Francisco and rose to become a network administrator. But then the San Francisco police bought a shot spotter system, which is a system of microphones around the city that detect when gunshots go off and tell the police where to go. And in order to activate that, they had to connect those to the internet. And what they wanted to do was to take the police network that did that and connect it to the court network, so to have just one network in San Francisco. But the law requires that a police network, anybody that has administrative rights over that, must take a background check. And the San Francisco network administrator knew that he could not survive the background check. So he refused to take the background check because he had lied on his resume, his application to get the job. And he knew that a background check would show his felony history and he'd lose his job. So he locked everybody out of the system. So nobody could get in. He had supposedly 2 other administrators that were working with him, but he had terrified them with threats of violence, so none of them knew how to do anything. He was the only one running the network and locking them out. What's that?
What year was this?
About 10 years ago. It was international news. It went everywhere because he locked everybody out. Nobody knew the password to get in the San Francisco network for months. They locked him in jail. Gavin Newsom, who was the mayor of San Francisco at the time, visited him in jail, and he lied to him and gave him the wrong password. And then he came and visited him again, and he finally told him the right password. Anyway, this went to court. and Conrad Rosario was the prosecuting attorney. And when he went to court, he had to try to explain to the judge. At this time, it was considered impossible to prosecute someone like this, because if they are your network administrator, how can anything they do be unauthorized? And he said, well, and besides, normal users did not lose access to the network. Normal users could still get email and stuff, but nobody could log into administrative accounts. So what he had to explain is he did not create a denial of service for users. He did create a denial of service for super users. And he was very proud of the fact that he managed to explain that to a judge and a jury. That is a fairly complicated technical concept, but he was able to explain that well enough to get him convicted, and that was the first time a network administrator had ever been punished for hacking that company's network. Because until then, it was considered impossible to convince anybody that they had exceeded authorization, since a network administrator typically is allowed to do anything. So anyway, that's the kind of thing I'm saying. That's why expert witnesses often come from college teachers and other people, because the hard thing is, first, the examination is a technical task, but in court you have to explain what you found in plain English so someone can understand it.
So what was he convicted of?
He was convicted of hacking, accessing a computer in excess of his authorization.
So what type of time does that charge carry? What did he
I
do?
think he got 5 or 6 years. And on top of that, he had a special hard drive full of data he had stolen from the network that was heavily encrypted, and they offered to drop all charges for the password of that drive, and he refused and went to prison for 5 or 6 years. So whatever's on that drive is so terrible that he'd rather go to jail than reveal it.
So that drive is still inaccessible.
That's right. If you encrypt something with the wrong password, nobody will ever get in. If you have like a 20-character random password, there's nothing that can get in at all. And yeah, there's a drive. They still have a drive in evidence, but nobody can get in. There's quite a few things like that. There's several Bitcoin wallets that are lost because nobody can get in. This is a popular belief, by the way, I should mention. A lot of people think that you can break into anything if you try hard enough, like if the NSA does it. There's a bunch of encryption that is so powerful, nobody can get in at all. Not the NSA, not anybody. That's why if you do encryption properly, you can lock things so you're never getting in without the right password. Anyway, so, all right, so email, I mentioned, all right, so then there's tampering with evidence is another issue, of course. If people try to erase evidence, and then you can usually get it back on computer systems. And if you know that there's a lawsuit coming at your company, you cannot destroy evidence relevant to that lawsuit, or you will be punished in court. If you go to court, this is why I mentioned e-discovery. E-discovery is what happens if you get sued, you go to court, and the judge says, all right, you must hand over all evidence related to this activity. For example, Google got sued by Oracle. Google made the Android operating system for cell phones, and the Android operating system is heavily dependent on Java. Now, Java has a free version and a proprietary version, and they claimed that they were using the free product but not the proprietary product, and Oracle, that owns Java, said, no, we need to pay us royalties for Java, which would amount to billions of dollars. And so then there was a discovery order requiring Google to hand over all their documents related to their design of Android and how they used Java. And they did include, by accident, an email which should have been excluded as attorney-client privilege, where they pretty much admitted they'd done it. But anyway, that's e-discovery. E-discovery is tracking this stuff down. And if you were to destroy the evidence rather than hand it over, then you would really lose in court. If the judge makes an order that you must hand over the evidence and you do not comply with the evidence, they can just rule against you. They can say, okay, we're allowed to assume that whatever you didn't give us is the worst thing it could possibly be. So these cases have been lost entirely that way.
What page are you scrolling on right here? Is this the Sam's info?
No, this is the City College Canvas page. So you go to the top of this samsclass.info and click on Canvas.
I'm on that.
All right. And then you have to log in with your City College RAM account. And then you should find this 121 course here. And then in there, you'll find it down here, Lecture 1. That's the page I'm looking at. Good. These are good questions. All right. And yes, someone's asking if I'll add from the waitlist to the DNS. Yes, I'll do that. The DNS course, I can't add them until Tuesday, but I'll add them then. All right. All right, so good? All right. And so, by the way, there is a very strange law. There are quite a few laws that are very strange in America. There was a time years ago when email did not go to your personal computer, it just lived on servers mostly. And there was an issue there of abandoned data. So they passed a rule saying that data abandoned on servers can be examined without a search warrant. And email older than 100, older than 180 days old, email on a server is considered abandoned. It can be accessed without a warrant. That is probably not just, but it is a sort of leftover thing. So it's another issue about email. Sometimes email evidence is particularly easy to get without a warrant for that reason. Anyway, all right. Another kind of evidence that's really important is images. Again, often the image itself is a crime, and images are very valuable in court because it's very easy for juries to understand. You have a picture of somebody doing something, everybody can understand what that means. Yeah.
Accessibility, is that the same with text messages as emails?
Accessibility?
You said 180 days, the leftover.
Oh, only email. A very good question. As far as I know, this 180-day thing applies only to email. I wonder if it would apply to SMS messages if they're older than 180 days. It's a good question. I don't know where SMS messages are stored. I don't know if they're actually stored on a server at the phone company after they're delivered. But I haven't ever heard of this being used for SMS. It's a very good question, though. There might be some circumstances under which you could do it. However, the phone network is very different than computer networks legally. For example, there's a law called CALEA that requires the phone network to offer assistance to law enforcement, so they must make it possible for cops to wiretap calls. There is no such requirement for the internet. So if you use Skype or email or Telegram or anything like that, the law enforcement typically has no way to get in. They use good encryption and there's no way to get in because they do not make any ability for them to get in. But in telephone networks, they are required to have a way to make a wiretap. Yeah?
Well, what about iMessages for Apple? Because I know that they harp a lot on security and...
Yes, it's a very good question. Apple's iMessage, I don't know specifically, but I know in particular, Apple has been very, very concerned with keeping stuff private. They're the most extreme that way. It's a selling point. So even the famous case was San Bernardino terrorist. They had a terrorist that shot up someplace and then got killed and left a phone behind. And they couldn't get in. And they asked Apple to let the FBI in the phone. And they said, no, we're protecting the privacy. And they said, what, the privacy of a dead terrorist? And they said, yes. And they never did let them in. However, what they did was they went and bought an Israeli product from Cellebrite, we're going to talk about more, that just hacks in. If you buy expensive commercial hacking products, they can hack through anyway. But Apple wouldn't let them in. So I don't know about iMessage in particular, but I know Apple is extremely strict about protecting the privacy of their users, although almost everybody uses iCloud backup. And if you do, they can get in that, and a court order will reveal that. So in fact, unless you turn off iCloud backup, you don't really have any privacy from the government. But if you do turn off iCloud backup and have an iPhone, you have probably the most security you can reasonably get that nobody's getting in there. These are very good questions. And this is up to the judgment of the company. You know, AT&T is basically a branch of the government. They let the government just see everything. And Microsoft is very similar. They very much have a lot of military contracts, and they pretty much cooperate with the government. Apple does not. Yeah?
Is evidence obtained without your permission admissible against you in court?
That's a very good question. It's a question, is evidence obtained without your permission admissible in court? In general, no. There are exceptions. For example, if it is a company device, then the company has the right to inspect it, whatever you think. But if you work from home on your personal device, this is something the company lawyers really don't like, because then it's really not clear whether they have the right to examine that device or not. It would be a whole lot better if they made you drive in and use a computer on your desk that came from the company and not use your personal device, but that's totally impractical. Everybody uses their personal device for company work, and it's just very difficult in court. There will be an issue of whether they were allowed to seize that. And also, there are other exceptions. For example, if you're not an American citizen, you have no privacy at all. The government can totally inspect your stuff. And if it involves terrorism, there are exceptions under the Patriot Act and such. But in general, they would need to have a search warrant in order to search your stuff. However, there's also a plain view doctrine. If they didn't have to put much effort into searching it, and whatever they found was just sitting right in front of them in public, then they don't need a search warrant for that. And there's also exigent circumstances. If there's some kind of emergency, like somebody's been kidnapped, they can just seize stuff and inspect it without getting permission. So, all these things go to court where lawyers fight about it. But in general, what you're saying is, it's quite correct to say that if you don't give the permission to examine this device, then they can't use that against you in court. Unless they get a search warrant. That's what's required. That gives them the ability to seize your stuff without your permission and examine it. I might as well mention while we're here, then the issue is, what if your phone is locked and you don't want to give up the password? The First Amendment originally said you have freedom of speech. It wasn't until like the 60s or 70s that they decided to add to this by the Supreme Court, interpreting it that you also have the freedom to keep silent. Now you are considered to have the freedom to keep silent, and therefore, if they demand your password, you can say no. But if it uses biometrics like a fingerprint or a face print, that is not speech, and you do not have the right to keep that silent, and the police can force you to put your finger on it or point it at your face and get in. So the privacy experts say you should not use biometrics. You should use a passphrase or a PIN. So that's if you want to hide your stuff from the government. Of course, hiding from the police and the government is very difficult, of course. Most of us don't care about that. We just want to hide from criminals, and then ordinary procedures are okay. Anyway, good. So here's various kinds of image files, bitmaps, JPEGs, TIFFs, and PNGs, and there are others. And the images often contain metadata. You'll have an image, and often you'll have extra data in there that records when it was taken, the GPS location, the ownership, the person who owns the camera or phone it was taken on, and so on. And then, of course, video. Everybody's taking videos all the time with their cell phones and other devices, and those are quite useful. And plenty of devices like ATM machines automatically take videos of everybody that uses it. And there's an incredible amount of people with cameras pointing out on the street and in garages everywhere. I think I've read the average American gets their picture taken 150 times a day. The only country that gets more than this is Britain, where they get taken even more pictures, and they have microphones all over the place recording your conversation. Because of the American legal system, you can't record conversation. You couldn't put a microphone in public. You could totally put a webcam out in public recording stuff, but a microphone would be violating a law. But not in Britain. In Britain, there are apparently microphones on every corner recording what people say. All right. And there's closed circuit TV, which is often used for surveillance of things like parking lots and stuff, that just sends it back to like a guard looking at the video screen.
Microphone surveillance and the term bugs sound a little ignorant.
Yeah, microphones and bugs require a warrant in America. You can't just put one out in public and record everything people say, even out in public, even out on a public street. I don't quite know why, but that's what I've read. That's why we don't have microphones just everywhere, the way we do totally have cameras everywhere. All right. All right, and then of course, when you investigate a machine, you often want to see what they were doing on the web. So you get the websites they've been to. So when you're on a machine, you're sending requests to a server, and it's sending pages down, and it's recording information about this everywhere, as we're going to see. If you're doing anything on a computer and you want to deny it later, you're in big trouble, because computers have all kinds of records kept inside them of every website you go to, the images you view, what time it happened, and so on. It is not easy to clean all that up. So, all right, and then cell phones, of course, are the number one computing device, I think, by most people. You do everything on your phone. Your phone has your whole life on it, and we'll do investigations of phone evidence. You can totally gather the data off a phone and analyze it, unless your phone is encrypted and you don't have the PIN or password. Then it's not easy to get in, although, as I say, there are some expensive tools that can do it, like Cellebrite. All right. And then, of course, Internet of Things, like we say, thermostats, Ring cameras, your car's GPS, your car's other systems, everything has now got a computer in it, and all those computers are keeping various records of what they do, not usually deliberately. I mean, it's not like people want to keep track of what you're doing on your computer. It's just in order for it to work, they need to record what happens. They aren't, unless you are at a high security system and someone has turned on auditing, it's not deliberately recording what you do. It's just accidentally leaving evidence of what you do. But it turns out if you know how to find it, it's all there. All right, so if you want to be a digital forensic investigator, the main thing you need, of course, is technical IT knowledge. You need to understand how data is stored on devices and how to extract it and search through it efficiently. You know how hardware and software work, know how encryption works. All right, And then you have to have investigative abilities, understanding how to prove that you know who is actually using a computer, because it might be a different person using someone's computer. So you try to find them logging into something like email or chat or Facebook or something to give you stronger evidence that you know who was there. And then figuring out if they go to a website, whether they really did that intentionally. There was a case I heard about from one of my forensic examiners. He's the official forensic examiner of the Teachers Union in Washington State. And what he does is child pornography cases all the time. I didn't know this, but there are quite a few high school teachers who are in fact pedophiles. And parents are very, very upset about this, and they try to find them and convict them and lock them up. And they're frequently accused.
Pedophiles or adophiles?
Well, what they do is they view child pornography in class on class machines. This happens.
What percentages we're getting here, and where are they from?
Well, you could be right. I don't know the difference, but I know legally they're in a world of trouble if they do that. And he investigates their evidence to see if they've done that. And the accusation comes up all the time. And in one of his cases, one of his students who wasn't so good got a case, examined a machine, and found all these URLs to porn sites on it, and said, there, this guy is guilty. But it turned out that person did not go to those sites. There was an anti-malware tool installed that had a list of sites to block. So those URLs were on the computer, but it's not because somebody opened a browser and went to them. They were in a list of things to block. So it is easy to make a mistake.
Yeah,
You find
porn sites are going to bait and rate, and they're going to take you to a barely legal dividing line and just laugh.
Yep, that's why you shouldn't be doing that at work, especially if you're a high school teacher. But anyway,
Trust me, I've studied it.
but anyway, so that's the thing. You'll find evidence on a machine, but you have to understand what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody went to that website if you find evidence of a website on a machine. You have to be more careful in what you determine. You need to know the popular operating systems, Windows, iOS, and Linux, Android, and so on. And you need to have some knowledge of the law. We've just talked about this. If it's your personal device at home, then the Fourth Amendment applies. The government cannot search it without a search warrant. They have to go in court and prove they have reasonable evidence to believe that they will find evidence of a crime on there. And they have to convince a judge to sign on that before they can go in and seize your stuff. You have to have good communication skills. As I said, you must write clear reports, and you must give clear explanations in court that someone can understand without technical knowledge. And you must have linguistic abilities, and you have to keep learning, which is true of all technical fields. That's why we're all here as adults, still going to college. You have to keep learning forever in this business because it's constantly changing. There's always new devices and new techniques. And you have to be able to keep things confidential. In any kind of security field, including this one, you will learn information that is not public information, and you have to sign non-disclosure agreements, and you have to keep it secret. The same thing's true of lawyers and doctors. You learn things, and you have promised not to expose them, and if you do expose them, there are consequences. So in the 80s, the main thing we worried about was magnetic hard drives, so the FBI created a magnetic media program and talked about how to image magnetic hard drives. In the 1990s, the Secret Service got on board and made the Electronic Crimes Task Force, which I'm a member of, and you can too if you've never worked on a defense case. It's the branch of the Secret Service where you had these very interesting meetings to talk about techniques of forensic investigation. And they got these regional computer forensics labs opened, and we'll talk about a few of the tools from them as we go ahead. Then the Patriot Act came out in 2001, which greatly increased the ability of the government to search devices without permission if they're in any way related to terrorism. And in 2010s, we got cryptocurrency, which opened up a whole new field of crime. Silk Road sold all kinds of illegal things like drugs and guns and murder for hire for Bitcoin. And Internet of Things devices became prevalent. And Edward Snowden leaked all the information that the NSA had been hacking American companies in blatant violation of apparently the Constitution and seizing all their data. And this had a lot of consequences. This made it more difficult for Europeans to use American services as European nations decided their data was not safe in America. It caused almost every website to upgrade from TLS 1.0 to TLS 1.2 to get the property of forward secrecy, so it's more difficult to steal encrypted web pages, and also made it more difficult for law enforcement to get data. It was a shockwave felt in the legal and computer security world around the world, changing many people's practices. So there's lots of places you can get training in this, and there are some professional certifications. There are some non-vendor specific ones like CFCE, but the main ones that are greatly sought after are the NCASE. NCASE Certified Examiner is the one you need if you want to work for a police department. Almost every police department uses this commercial product called NCASE. It is the standard for police departments. The FBI uses Access Data, FTK. And so the ACE is the certification for Access Data's FTK product, and NCASE Certified Examiner is the one for NCASE, and those are the most valuable professional certifications you can get in this field. There are quite a few others, but these ones tied to specific products are the ones that are most commonly sought after for jobs. All right, and let me, all right, let me stop this recording and answer a few more questions.